Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just found out that there's a proper placement of flag, right? And we fixed it. We called out on that.
Director Diamond,
Here.
Director Hetherington,
Here.
Director Odette,
Here.
and Director Rolfe,
Here.
and Director Stevens.
Here.
All right, before we start, is there any public comment on anything that's not on the budget workshop agenda? Okay.
I see no public.
All right, Kelly.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors, staff members, and public who is maybe on Zoom. We're excited to meet today for our 2024 budget workshop. We look forward to discussing updates to our investment policy 308 and our reserve policy 309, as well as the methodology behind our new reserve plan. We'll also review the strategic plan drivers and how they are directly reflected in our budget process. At today's workshop, the focus will be on capital projects, reserves, and policy updates. And at the next meeting in October, we will come with the traditional operating budget with revenues and expenses. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can never hear regardless.
I'm yelling. And then just a fun note I wanted to throw out there that last week I had the opportunity to go on a little site tour of the airfield from an operations perspective. And I don't get out, obviously, very much, in finance. So it was really cool to get out there and see the airfield with the ops team, and just was a great reminder to me of what an incredible place this is, what a great staff we have, an amazing facility, and a benefit to our community. And that, I think, is a great segue into talking about investment policy 308. So if you have already seen the red line version, it's in the board packet. We can pull it up if you can see it up there. In the draft copy, there's only one major change, and that is to put in an additional investment option. We are referring to it as the Cal class, but it's California Liquid Asset Security System. And this is a recently formed JPA pooled investment option that is for California public agencies. Just gives us another avenue to invest. They have two different funds, and right now it actually has, or as of the end of the second quarter, their rate of return was 4.89%. LAIF is 3.15, so LAIF is starting to catch up, which is great. This is a little bit better than LAIF. But it just gives us another way to ladder our investments and think about reserving for the future. Any questions on that change to PI 308?
May I make a comment about this?
Please do.
I would highly encourage us looking at treasuries. We haven't used them before, and you could ladder. We have so much cash, regardless which bank account it might be in. I think we could ladder treasuries such that we could get a pretty good return, maybe better than LAIF. I would hope so.
Certainly, and we have that ability.
And I in spite of the coming shutdown of the government, I think treasuries still are pretty good.
Absolutely.
I'm,
And we have that
I'm
as
long in treasuries.
part of this. Any other questions or comments from the public? Okay. Moving on, next we have PI 309. So this is the policy instruction formerly known as designating unrestricted net assets. So in your draft copy, the beginning couple of pages is the new, completely new policy, and then the bottom portion is the old one that we're switching away from. The new policy follows recommendations from CSDA, the California Special District Association, as well as best practices from other special districts in the region and in the state. The major change from this old methodology is that we're going from a very specific itemized detail within the policy to a more categorized approach. And then in the budget process each year, we can identify what those specific things are, but they're not housed directly in the policy. And then in that policy, you'll note that we have, and we've been talking about this for the last year, so our new 4 categories of reserves. So we've got cash and operating contingency, new machinery and equipment, replacement reserves, and development. And in the policy, each one of those categories has definitions for the purpose, target balance, methodology, use of funds, and contributions for each of those categories. And it will help inform the yearly savings that we need to complete these short-term and long-term infrastructure and facility maintenance goals, and then also maintaining reserves for the other categories. We'd like to adopt this policy in October as well as 308. And the following presentation that we're going to go through with the budget really goes into more detail on all this stuff. So if we have questions, if you want to ask them at the end of all that, some of your questions may be answered within the presentation itself. And next, it's time to talk about budget. So if we could switch back to the budget presentation, please.
Well, I have some
Oh, sorry.
comments on policy on this PI 309. I pulled up the old one, and there's things in here that kind of concern me. One, we quote grant assurance 25. We should also quote grant assurance 24, which is all about being self-sustaining as possible. I have a heartburn with the whole thing because it's such a huge shift from the old 309. And I don't know if anybody else has looked at the old 309, but it's a big shift. The other thing is that we're quoting this public funds doctrine, and we're quoting it as if it comes out of the California Constitution. And I actually pulled out and made copies for everybody if anybody's interested in terms of what that section says, and this is not a quote. And it is a quote from BBK. Again, this comes from my life as a bond engineer, where if you're gonna quote something, it better be true. And so I have some real issues with this. And I talked to Josh earlier, and I talked to Rob about that as well. And in terms of the memo that it came out was from December 31, 2020, and it was Josh's analysis. And so I feel very strongly that that needs to be cleaned up. And,
What exactly, I'm sorry, I'm not following what you want.
okay, the second dot under federal and state policy on use of funds. 309.
Mary, may it be helpful just to let people know it's the bottom dot up on the
Right
screen.
there. And the old 309 policy was very different. It was first adopted in '98 and updated almost every year. And this is a real shift and change. So here, so first off, just to say this gift of public funds doctrine, and it's quote, Article 16, Section 6, of the California Constitution prohibits public entities from providing aid, pledging credit, or making a gift of public funds or anything else of value to an individual or other corporation. This is an analysis done by Josh. It's his quote. It's not in the Constitution, and I've given you all the wording of that, just so you can see that.
That being the Constitution or Josh's interpretation?
It's quoted as coming from the Constitution. That's there, and it's not a true.
Code.
Page 11 of this thing.
Well, it's in there, but it's also in policy 309, and it
But
affects,
Mary's saying what is printed on page 11 is not the same as in the state constitution. Is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
correct.
What's printed on page 11 is public code.
Page 11 of this is,
So
no, it's not page 11, it's page 10. And it's the federal quote of grant assurance 25.
You're right, page 10.
Yeah. And then the second bullet is the same as this bullet. And it's quoting it from the California Constitution. I sent you, I looked it up because I was very curious. And it's not a quote from the California Constitution. I mean, it's BBK's analysis, and in that same analysis, he has quite a lot of other language that is from December 31, 2020, Guidelines for Community Sponsorships and Agency Partnerships. It was signed by both Josh and Brent. I have a copy of that. So, and applying these rules, TTAD has the authority to provide community and similar partnerships, provided they serve a public purpose. There's just a lot more in here, and so I have heartburn with 309 as it's written, just right off the bat, for one. For two, you kind of have to read the old policy 309 to see how it shifts. Because the old policy 309 talked about designating unrestricted net assets. And their designations are internal, and the board can remove or modify them as required. It had specific lineouts for debt retirement, pavement maintenance, capital reserve, facility maintenance, utility capital, general fund operating, capital project reserve, acquisition of land and forest management, which had a budget of 1.3 million, annoyance reduction and outreach projects reserve, 500,000, and rolling stock reserve. It all added up to 6.579 million. So it breaks out what each of these categories should be. Debt retirement, 539, which is 539,000, and that is related to the executive hangars. Pavement maintenance capital reserve, $1 million. Facility maintenance capital reserve was 400,000. Utility capital reserve is 100,000. General fund operating contingency was 990,200. Capital project reserve is 1.5 million. Acquisition of land was $1 million. Forest management capital reserve 300,000. Annoyance reduction and outreach projects reserve 500,000, and rolling stock reserve 250. So this was lined out before, and I'm suggesting that we as a board need to look, if we're shifting, it's a big shift from what this was to this, and I can't support this. So I'm just,
What's being proposed, you can't
correct,
support, is that
the
what
new PI 309 for the details. And I'm asking the board, you know, we got the new version, we didn't get the old version. I'm a paper monger, so.
The old
And-
version is on page 4.
Okay. So I pulled it up, I did the comparison. I'm asking the board, did anybody else do a comparison of the old versus the new?
No, I looked at it from a different perspective.
Okay,
My perspective, you know, is what's being suggested. Sorry. What's being suggested is we take the reserve study as what we really have to do, and we can build up a huge reserve over time. I'd like to see some of it in action. I mean, one thing that I look at in the 9-page short form that makes me a little nervous is we've got probably $500,000 into the EAA building, which I'm not sure we should put any money in that damn building. I mean, the FAA would really like it to go away. And if we ever widened and extended 220, it would have to go. So I guess I'd like to see what we're talking about specifically, maybe for 2 or 3 years, very specific numbers, because I really can't tell with the yellow ones, which are medium. I don't see any reds. I don't see any
The
lows.
yellow ones are just year 0, which would be 2024. And with the facility maintenance plan, we took the same methodology where we're not going to do everything that's called out, right, for 2024. So I took off EAA. I took off the things that don't make sense because we may tear them down. So further in the
Well, it's-
presentation, it talks about what we do want to try to do on that list for 2024.
Where do I see that? I've somehow missed that. Further in what presentation?
We haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh,
It's coming. Yeah, that's what I was saying. A lot of your questions will be answered in the presentation.
so just for interest's sake, I got the whole document. of the reserve study, all 289 pages. And it shows the breakout for every year from 2024 up through 2063. It also has pages showing us growing our reserves, you know, up to a lot. And what it does is, what this board's view is different maybe from a future board. And if you have a big reserve, where does that money get spent? And what we're doing, I am all about maintenance. Everybody knows that, and maintaining. When the question came up under our previous manager, and one of the hangar roofs was scheduled to be done under the facility maintenance plan, because I pulled that out as well. And I was the only board member who said, do it. The facility maintenance plan says do it. And Kevin said, well, we can wait. We don't really need to do it right now. But I am all about maintaining and protecting our assets. And so I want to do that, but I also think some of this stuff is over the top. And the shift that it's, like you say, what's the plan for the next year? What's the plan for the next 2 or 3 years? So that we can make an informed decision rather than having no input.
So, can we get back to this, where we started? I think everybody had a different, opinion about this, and I feel like we've gone into the budget. We haven't had Kelly's presentation yet. David, did you have any comments on, Mary's issue with?
Well, and I need to interpret a little bit of what you're saying, Mary, so tell me if I'm wrong. I'm completely in agreement that if we have misquoted something, especially if we've cited a source, it needs to be corrected. That makes total sense to me. If that just means changing the attribution from the gift of public funds doctrine to BBK interpretation of, or restatement of, or something like that, I think that's fair. We shouldn't have a misquote on there, if that's the case. And the other thing about this, and I did talk to Rob about that, I do feel like when we do quote the Airport Special Districts Act, we need to include the last phrase, always. And that last phrase is the objective being to encourage airport and spaceport development by communities and to distribute the cost uniformly among all who benefit. Because I think that is a guiding principle to a lot of what this board and previous boards have done with regard to community investment. So I feel like when we omit that last phrase from anywhere that statement, it's not providing a foundation to those who are reading it about why we do what we do.
So why did we delete that phrase?
We did not delete it. I just pulled it directly as it was written.
Yeah, and why we didn't include the full phrase in 2020 when we put the memo, I'm not sure. Certainly wasn't intentional. We can include the balance of that section.
Well, I agree with David that we ought to include it. Is it there? I can't read it.
It can be.
It's not, but
It's not currently there, we're happy to add and update
Yep, after the dot, dot, dot.
full context of the
Right.
legal opinion of the California Code.
Did you have anything to add?
It's kind of big I'm rapidly trying to read this because thank you for bringing it. And for whatever reason, I couldn't pull up the policy on my iPad, so I haven't read the whole thing yet. However, I don't disagree with any of this. I feel like it's all going the same direction. We all kind of, what I'm feeling is an underlying theme of we don't want to park too much money for future boards to use, to not be in the community today, that kind of thing. And so I don't know where we're going to flesh that out, if it's after the presentation or at this point, but I think we should talk about it. And even this, you know, if this is the California Constitution, we should talk about it. Where does it say, this does not prohibit from blah, 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 you know? Meaning, it doesn't prohibit us, any of this language does not prohibit us from helping people in need, or, you know, that's a summary, but that's basically what it says. So I do think we should talk about it. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or after the presentation. You tell me.
I think it's after the presentation.
Okay, I'm good with that. Take some notes.
I just wanted to sort of sunset the policy instruction before we but you still have,
Well, because if we are okay with the rest of this policy instruction, you know, let's say you make these changes, but the rest of the policy instruction is in here, and I have a lot of comments in it here. So I'm very uncomfortable adopting this policy 309, and to think that they're separate entities is not true. Therefore, we can talk about it now, or we can talk about it during the reserve discussion, but I would just ask this board to read the old version and then read this version and say, what is it we're trying to do? And I would ask, that goes back to staff, you know, because I would never be able to adopt this as is, because it's such a left turn.
all right, well, why don't we just go ahead with the presentation?
Sounds great. If I could just a couple, just specific to a reserve policy in the changes that are being proposed. The previous policy outlined a number of concepts. For example, you're reserving money unrestricted, so you're not really reserving money. You can move the money anywhere you want to. Any board can. So that's currently in place now with the existing policy. The new policy doesn't change that. The airport district does not have restricted funds of any of our funds. What we're trying to do is create 4 categories of reserve funds that are outlined. We'll walk through a presentation about this, that very clearly has a methodology behind how we determine how much money should be reserved in those 4 categories. Currently, there's not necessarily a methodology. There's ideas and concepts. And some of them are capital-based concepts. Many of them are operating cost concepts. And so you're reserving money for future operating concepts. Forest management is an example in there. You're saving a designated amount of money in the past to do forest management. The way we treat forest management from a fiscal perspective is an operating cost, not a capital reserve cost. So those are the kind of things that are layered in the old policy that are inconsistent in the way we budget and the way we actually execute money. So this new approach, which is more standard across the entire special district association and public sector, as opposed to what we've been using, which was, I think, a concept was just made up here. We're trying to use a standard methodology that you see across public sector that creates reserve fund policy and reserve funds under that policy that have a specific methodology about how we go about determining the necessary fund balance for those. And it's a matter of perspective. How much money do you want to reserve is a matter of policy. It doesn't mean you have to reserve 100% of the needs for the future that you currently identify. There's a spectrum in there. We'll walk through what that spectrum is. That's part of what the reserve study is recommending as a fund balance for the reserve replacement portion of it alone. The development fund is something different. It's about very large projects, very new things here, and those are established by a collective effort of the community, the board, and management trying to determine what those are. Some of those big ticket items that are on the reserve list you talked about, Rick, that are highlighted in year 0 that currently won't be on or aren't currently on our proposal to do are very large things, like all those components of the EAA building add up to probably $1 million, we'll say. So it doesn't mean we're going to go out and replace every piece of that building, because we need to do it when things come to that level of analysis of what we can do with that facility, because it's so old and it's so dilapidated. We've identified all the parts in that building that are over $2,000 that last longer than 2 years, and they add up to a lot of money. Then we need to have a hard look about whether we just keep fixing that old thing and keep it going. We can keep it going for a long time. Whether there's longer term implications of runway configurations that it impacts, and whether it makes more sense to tear the whole thing down and build something different somewhere else. And so those are all things that have not been determined yet. What we have done is identified all the pieces and parts of all of our facilities that are capital in nature, and we built them into that reserve study. So we have them all captured, and it's a 30-year look at all of our pieces and parts here. So we're trying to take a little bit of the politics out of when and what we repair to be a little more scientific and direct about this year, the useful life of these items is coming due. That means we need to go look at those items and decide how much money we want to budget in the future for those, and then determine which of those items still have a useful life will extend, or which ones we need to replace. but we have a methodology, a very concrete methodology for just these capital items of replacement reserve, not the replacement, the R&M portion. The previous facility maintenance plan was these merged concepts together, and it was a document that would say that wasn't widely used here, despite its creation, like many documents that we have here and other places. So we're trying to get a utilization of a document that we can actually put into practice both in our budget planning, in our reserve planning, and actual execution in our day-to-day, month-to-month practices here. So with that, I'd like to jump in and walk through the presentation with Kelly, talk about our capital component of our budget plan for 2024, and we'll get into the details of what's involved in those 4 different reserve buckets. In addition, we'll talk about segregation of funds, which is not part of the previous reserve policy. It was all just one bucket. And we're trying to get away from that because we do have a thing called airport revenue, which we can't use for things off the airport. So we need to very disciplined put money in the right bucket and not take money out of those buckets and only use it for the proper thing. So the old policy didn't recognize that and didn't address that. The new policy does, along with a couple different practices we'd like to put in place here.
Can I just comment in terms of the policy
Thanks,
309, which is in the reserve as well? But effectively, if you look at it, there's nothing in here about community benefit under these 4 pots. And that's of concern to me.
Community
It's not a capital item. Not capital. So just want to go over the timeline briefly. Thanks for moving everything forward to today. Next month on the 25th, we'd like to present draft number 1. We can talk about this later on in the presentation as well to see if anyone has interest of having another workshop on that same day to do the traditional revenue expense side presentation. And then shooting for November 29th, have our final draft and adopt it at that meeting. Back to you, sir.
All right, thanks for the setup. Kelly did all the hard work on all this. I will admit she has built this budget. She's been working on this along with the normal duties. It's always a major effort that goes in this with her whole team and the whole staff that provides input on this. It's not perfect. We're not done yet. We're in a process here over the next 2 months to refine this in development, get the board feedback, get the community feedback, whether it's online or here present. Thank you all for being here. We thought we'd first start by where we were a year ago. As we finish up 2023, we want to talk about how this year has gone because it'll help inform us as we move into 2024. So as we have ideas about, we want to do everything possible here in the capital world, the airport. Want to narrow that down a little bit to what we think is realistically impossible by first talking about what our ideas were last year and where we're at this year with a variety of different projects. So this sheet comes out of our last year budget documents. When we first adopted this concept of these 4 focus areas, that we've adopted the same concept with new specific ideas and goals and strategies with our strategic plan. But this is last year's as part of our current 2023 year budget. Adopted last year as part of our budget this year. These different 4 focus areas, this is the same text and same graphic that was part of the budget process last year. What I've added is green check marks on it to really highlight and identify what I believe we have accomplished over this last almost a year now, with a little bit of time left ahead of us. And ones without a check mark are still things we're working on, and some of those we've carried over and are part of our new strategic plan, and we've become part of our informed budget process, so we identify the right funds in order to accomplish those specific goals and strategies that go with those. So first and foremost, in the top left-hand corner there, you see develop a reserve policy and strategy. That was identified last year as something we wanted to do. We looked at the old reserve policy. We weren't satisfied with it, and there was specific direction for the board of directors to review this policy instruction and come at it with a new recommendation. Here we are a year later. We finally have it all in writing. We have the adjustments. We've done a lot of research about standard practices across California and special districts, and that's the draft you have in front of you today. So we're almost there with updating that as directed by the board of directors last year. We have a new strategic plan that's in place, that's being socialized with the community. The board put a lot of years-long work into that, along with the team here and our consultants and the community feedback along that process. We have prioritized future airport development plans. We are in that process. That is, I would say, an important part of today's workshop and in the subsequent weeks ahead of us here to really identify that missing element that's not black and white, that's very much gray about what are our future development projects here. The reserve replacement we'll walk through is a very definitive, this door has a 20-year useful life. In 20 years, we're gonna come back and look at it, and we're gonna save money to replace it in 20 years because it costs $2,000. And we may extend the life in 20 years, or we may not, but we have a specific strategy to address savings and reserves and replacement of things. The harder one is a little less scientific. It is, we have vacant land over here, and we haven't decided what we want to do with it. We know it's zoned aeronautical or non-aeronautical, depending what parcel of land you point to, and we really don't have a cohesive strategy and our idea about what we're going to do with our critical vacant land that we have. We also have redevelopment issues, which is even more complex. We have aging hangars that probably either need to be majorly reinvested in or completely torn down and replaced. That's a hard concept that involves both reserve funding and development fund funding, the way we're describing reserve development. So those are concepts that we still have to work out over the next several weeks. And it won't be perfect, but we want to at least begin getting the basic strategy around what the priorities are for this next year and thinking about long-term years for large expenditure of items so we can reserve that money appropriately, so we have the money in the bank so we can do projects, or we develop a strategy where we borrow money, or maybe it's a combination of both. Landing fee has been put in place last October. That's still a new item. We still get plenty of feedback from pilots that haven't been here a while that didn't know there was a landing fee. Despite our outreach efforts, there's a transient, aviation community that doesn't come here. It comes here infrequently. And so trying to reach them and help them understand what that is, it's not uncommon to have a landing fee, but for some folks that haven't seen or experienced here in a while, we're still, a year later, talking about that with our transit community and helping them understand why it's in place, what it helps us recover in the way of our costs, in the way of pavement management plan, but also in our control tower here as well. So that's still, even though it's been a year, we're still on a educational process with communicating with our pilot community and our aviation community. Master fee schedule, this is in market rates. This is an ongoing effort as well this year. Continue to address what are our true costs of operating here and how do we address those appropriately through our market mechanisms. Some of it will happen over time. We have leases that are in place. They don't expire for several years. They may be under market, or we don't have a current market study. These are things that will constantly be updated and addressed over time as things expire or are more appropriately addressed. Truckee Way, the last one there, this is just the concept that we've talked about before, but if you haven't heard about that and you're watching for the first time an airport district board meeting, there's a concept called the Truckee Way that was established in the town of Truckee. And that's when we talk about introducing new ideas or change in the community to past practices, is that we don't do it immediately, that we introduce it over time, we socialize it, we try to get feedback from the collective population or the impacted stakeholders, and we move through that change in the most informed manner that we can over time. Sometimes that timeline could be a month, and sometimes it could be a year. Sometimes it's multiple years. But the idea is that we just don't make snap decisions and change things overnight. We try to have, just like these board meetings, a regular communication methodology with the community about change. Over in operational, update and board policy instructions. We have 2 in front of the board to date for consideration for next month for adoption with some modification and feedback from the board of directors. We're almost through all of our board policy instructions over the last year, which has been a tremendous workload to update those and really think about our fundamental policies that go with our strategic plan about how we do business here and what the fundamental structure of a variety of different things are associated with policies, whether it's investment or reserves or a whole number of policies, from our community giving policy, policy 311. The board has seen those over the last year, and the diligence pursuit to update those, I think, is effective, hopefully, and at least making sure that we are operating with current understanding and guidance from the board of directors here. And we'll continue to update those on a 5-year basis or as needed based on policy changes. Of course, we're onboarding still and using the Civics program here, and that is our internal customer management software system here that we mostly work with our tenants on. Our hangar tenants is our biggest customer base that will address. And that is an ongoing adoption here at the airport, and we began just starting to go live with that with our customer base, specifically with our leaseholders and our hangar tenants. Of course, runway 220 is currently under construction as planned. We plan to wrap that up here at the end of October and get that back open again, so we can continue to support our general aviation community here and with both runways, given our variety of weather patterns that we have. Hangar turnover and availability. This is different than the hangar revitalization plan. Last year we identified, hey, we want to make sure that we have aircraft in hangars and that we're using the hangars appropriately for aviation purposes, and that we are also not waiting 6 months to turn a hangar over. And we've made a diligent effort on the O&M team here and our contract management team to really identify those hangars that did not have aeronautical uses in them, to get that non-aeronautical use out, whether it was our own district policy of using some hangars for things, or whether or not that was just a slow turnover process by somebody changing aircraft or changing aircraft sizes or moving on and just turning over the actual maintenance turnover there. I don't have a hard metric on that number, but I think we're getting to points with the implementation of the Civics program to begin tracking that very precisely about what that metric is for hangar turnover and availability. That wasn't something that was in place in the past. But with the Civics program, it's something we're able to add some more metrics to talk about what is the typical turnover time for a hangar. Is it 30 days? Is it 90 days? We'll have metrics as we implement that new program and go through a number of hangar turnovers. Let's see, down on the left there, of course, we've moved to a status of having sustainable aviation fuel on board here as our primary jet fuel. We have now not only hit the 75% goal, but we've surpassed that. We're currently at 100% sustainable aviation fuel here at KTRK. We are continuing to explore a bioenergy facility with our community partners, which is the fire district, the town of Truckee, the public utility district, and our contractor that's looking at that. We expect a report out probably next month on that to provide additional information. Yes, ma'am. The Truckee Donner Public Utility District. That facility is designed, and the current scoping of it is intended to handle the forest waste from all of North Lake Tahoe into the facility is the idea, but it's being currently sited, planned to be sited down in the Truckee area. It is the Truckee Tahoe Fire Department involved in this effort, and it is the Truckee Donner Public Utility District involved in this, not the other fire districts or the other public utility districts. Yes, though we welcome additional community partners that want to invest in this program.
Have we reached out to them and asked them?
I don't know the current status of who made the connections or in that conversation, and I'm sure that's going to be an ongoing conversation, because certainly they will benefit greatly by having a facility that will handle locally bio waste, green waste, essentially from the forest, instead of hauling it to the landfill and just dumping it, which, you know, tremendous costs associated with that, or they're chipping it and leaving it on the ground, and you get, you know, deeper and deeper piles of wood chips, which is not the best conditions for the forest either. Let me just skip over to, let's see, develop community benefit policy. That was part of our policy instruction updates, policy instruction 311, which the board addressed that earlier this year. I believe it was in March. And let me stop there because I just wanted to cover a few of the highlights from this past year and what we've been working on, because that helps inform what we transition to work on for this next year, particularly those that involve a capital investment on this list here. Next slide.
Thanks, Rob. So all those things that we just went through on the demand and planning drivers directly feed into where we're shooting to end up for 2023, and that is a net income of 5.3 million. Just also a reminder, we've got 8 months of actuals in these numbers, 4 months of budget, so we still have 4 months to beat the budget. Things change. Quick example, the grant process for Runway 220. I had budgeted it out starting in May. We couldn't do any construction in May. So you'll see the numbers move from month to month that way because you don't know when we're going to be able to start construction. Next slide, please. And this is just a breakdown of where we think we're going to end up with revenues. Again, that 3.6 for grant revenue should go higher. There's no designation now from what the FAA's guidance between airside and non-airside. It's all airport revenue. Oh, me or you?
Yeah, let me
No,
try to
me.
answer that. I think I know what you're asking. Currently, we have one account with all of our money in it. And the way that the FAA looks at that is they would like to see us segregate the money, and we'll a couple slides about that later, so that we have money earned on the air side is airport revenue. And that must only be spent on airside activities and infrastructure and operations. They don't look or don't have an opinion about our state revenue, our tax-based revenue, but we want to separate that into a different account. That money we can use both on airside and non-airside. And so that's part of segregation of funds and part of the guidance. We think that will be coming here soon from the FAA, though in many regards it exists in current FAA policies. Right?
That was my question. Thank you.
Any other questions on revenue?
As a clarification point, I had asked you this yesterday. If you notice in the forecasted revenue from the FAA grant, it's 3.661 million. Half of that for the 6.2 million on the 220 reconstruction, half of that will show up in the 2024 revenue. Just-
Very little of it likely will show up next year.
Oh,
It's
you-
because,
different than you told me.
like I was just saying, I spread out the budget starting in May for that project, but we couldn't even start it until late August, end of July. So those months ahead of time will catch up now with the revenue that we get back when in fact, I just put a draw in this morning. So we're up to draw number 3. So it'll catch up. It's just a matter of the timing of the
And
budget.
you'll get most of it this year.
I believe so.
Most of the some will carry over next
Yeah,
year.
there's always a little bit of a carryover because the closeout process is kind of lengthy. They try to close up the grants as quick as they can, but it always takes a little bit of time.
Do you have any clarity on the property tax revenue? Which counties, how much from each county?
I have it broken down in another slide. Or I can pull it up for you.
For operating presentation next month, we'll be able to break it out.
Yeah, or I have it in the next meeting. I can tell you.
60% placer.
Yeah, it's about a 60-40 split. Okay.
And remember, plaster is not defined by the ridgeline. So people who live in Lahontan or North Star give
And
Truckee
Sierra Meadows
addresses.
and the
Right.
other side of
And the
Donner
Summit.
Lake.
Yeah, they
Yep.
give a Truckee address, but they are Placer County.
And this is just a quick look at forecasted expenses. We've been pretty diligent about making sure that we're mindful of spending. If a project comes up that needs to be done, we take care of things, but we're also mindful of what we're working on. And cost of goods are down a bit
Is-
from the jet fuel sales. It's just all related.
Should debt service be included at this point?
No,
Because,
it's an expense. It's a part of that 5.8.
Just not
pulled
broken
out
out.
by itself 'cause
And
it's an
depreciation is a
operating
paper expense, correct?
Correct. Any other questions about expenses? Back to you, sir.
Okay, so that was a budget plus forecast for the rest of the year, just to give you an idea of where we think we're gonna land. It will continue to adjust as the year plays out. So looking forward, as we talking about this next year's budget and our capital component of the budget, I know the board has seen this, I know staff has seen this document, but this is the page of our strategic plan that really outlines, other than the 4 focus areas and the goals associated with those, and we'll talk about those next in a minute. But I just want to focus on our guiding principles here and maybe take a minute to look at those, because as we think about what we're focused on doing when there's lack of guidance anywhere else, these are the things we turn to and look at to help inform us what direction we should be moving on things. So when we talk about, we adhere to the high standards of safety, accountability, equitability, and transparency. We'll talk about that in our open meeting. We just got recertified for Transparent California certification. We care for and invest in our land, facilities, team, and community. And that's a lot about building our reserves, talking about our capital plan for reinvestment in our infrastructure here. We maintain exclusive rights of airport land, facilities, in perpetuity. So any development here, just a reminder, that happens on airport district property is controlled by the airport district, the board of directors, in providing guidance of how you want to see what developed in order to support aviation and non-aviation type activities that are related to the purpose of an airport and are available funds that can fund different projects differently. We strive to make fair and equitable decisions with property taxes and user fees, and that's part of our having policies and instructions in place, and having thorough discussions about those policies when they're reviewed, and provides guidance to staff and to the community about how we are looking at a variety of different things and how we're going to use funds here. And obviously, we're talking about funds today on our capital side. We listen to and learn from our partners, neighbors, and constituents, and that's a little bit maybe a play in my mind on the Truckee way of North Lake Tahoe area. We like to think about being very deliberate but very engaging with our communities and our neighbors and our constituents about what we're doing and how it impacts them and how we can benefit everybody across the airport district with our activities and our funds as appropriately defined. And we are an industry leader in sustainable aviation. And this helps guide us on a number of things that we're doing here. Some of them are called out specifically in the focus area, but in areas that aren't specifically called out, it helps provide guidance about where our priority of time, staff attention, and effort should go. So next slide, please. So here I pulled out on our new strategic plan. The 4 focus areas are in the middle. The wording has changed slightly with guidance from the board of directors as part of our strategic plan. And in the outside corners of the slide, I've tried to highlight some areas that are in our strategic plan goals, just in short one-liners here to help orient us about what we're thinking about that impact our budget preparation here. On the left side in red over there about economic viability, it's fund reserves is called out, segregating funds, and that's part of our earlier discussion. We identify the policy, reserve policy, we fund the policy as we feel is appropriate for the future, and we also are going to segregate funds appropriately to track better the type of money, revenues that are coming in, and how we spend them to meet both required grant assurances and FAA requirements, but our own needs and desires to track funds more appropriately for their use. And we're focused on our funds on the purpose of the airport is called out in the strategic plan, as earlier talked about, and that fits a lot with the formation of the airport district, the guidance from our law firm, our policy instruction 311. Those all are weaved together. Not really trying to revisit ground that's been kind of hoed and planted already and established, but just recognizing those our conversations the boards had this last year, guidance has been provided by legal counsel, and guidance has been provided by the board of directors in the way of updating policies and forming the strategic plan to guide us on how to interpret the use of airport funds, along with the FAA policies and grant assurances as well. Invest employee housing, obviously there's a dollar cost to that, and we were identifying that in our budget process. Runway alternative feedback, this is our 1634 runway consideration. The board has provided direction on getting feedback from the FAA. Next year, moving into potentially the master plan phase 2 update. We've finished phase 1 essentially. And we need to move into phase 2 in order to update our overall master plan for the airport district here and our airport layout plan as well. And that'll probably be a 2-year process, I imagine. But we need to be programming money and thinking about that for this next fiscal year. And capacity of staff to be working with our contractors to do that. Our infrastructure investment plan, this is that nebulous gray area topic I was talking about earlier. This is our development fund. This is our reserve policy and our investment in our infrastructure. And that is something we're going to need to talk about a little bit more today for the remaining time and in the subsequent weeks after this meeting and our next meeting as well. On the right side, operational, recapitalize aging infrastructure, similar concept of our infrastructure investment plan. Hangar revitalization program, we're talking about that this afternoon as part of our ongoing efforts to utilize our hangars for aeronautical purposes. New flight procedures is an ongoing plan that has been identified in our strategic plan. Fly safe and fly quiet, those are programs that will be discussed this afternoon in our regular board meeting as draft recommendations from management to the board of directors to get community and board feedback and guidance. Update our primary management compliance documents, our PMCDs that are directly related to any kind of changes in our hangar utilization policies or other utilization or engagement policies in the use of our lands and our leaseholders. And that's targeted, actually, ideally we do that before the end of this year. Developing DEI strategy. Down in green are natural resource conservation, 100% blended Jet A SAF. There is an industry a variety of terminology around sustainable aviation fuel. We're working through that. The industry is working through that. Essentially, SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, is a blended product of something called NEAT and Jet A, essentially. And there's more to that, but we, as I mentioned earlier, are at that, and we will continue to make our best effort to continue to maintain that level. There's further conversations and budget implications around doing that that we need to identify in the budget process. Transition to unleaded avgas, Climate Transformation Alliance focus and their initiatives and our participation, our net zero goals, really identifying what those are, revisiting those, working with our contractor N0 to complete a current inventory of what we have here compared to our past studies and where we want to go, where there's opportunities to continue to reduce our carbon footprint here as a general aviation airport. Social responsibility, our Fly Quiet, Fly Safe program again. STEAM aviation investment focus. A lot of work needs to be done around this, I would say. We have a discussion next month now with our air show committee and management and our committee members of the air show committee to talk about ideally not just a one-day event of an air show, but a year-long program that the board has been asking and providing guidance as part of the strategic plan as their interest in seeing. Hopefully we'll be able to work through that and talk about what that looks like for this next year and not just a one-day air show. Communication programs, this is an ongoing effort to improve our engagement with our community and socialize all these changing things that are happening as part of our strategic plan to our community so they're not surprises to anybody and the community can have feedback along the process as we go. So these are areas that will impact and influence the subsequent slides here both today and next month as we talk about our operating budget.
I have just one comment
Sure.
here in terms of the economic viability, those listings of 7 things. instead of focus funds on purpose of the airport, I would say focus funds on maintaining our facilities or rehabilitating our facilities.
Yeah, I think it's a parallel comment is the idea, and these are just meant to be short summaries, not all inclusive of what's outlined in the strategic plan and the strategies and the goals. That goes into more detail about those specific topics. I'm just trying to, at a high level, to summarize key areas. I think recapitalize aging infrastructure really gets to that specific facility issue here at the airport.
It's a word thing that how it plays out and the view of it in a community. That language bothers me more than saying something like, and I'm very much about let's maintain our facility, let's rehabilitate our facility. But that is a very different thing as compared to this language about the purpose of the airport. To somebody else who, I think that would be a more accurate sense of where it goes. I don't know if the board has a sense.
Yeah, I think my interpretation is that comes right out of our policy 311 that the board approved that talks about the purpose of the airport and the use of funds, and very specific guidance that was called out in our legal memos that we had that informed that policy. That wording is actually in the policy, and so I'm just trying to highlight that. This is a highlight that's actually in the strategic plan and called out in the strategic plan. So I'm not creating this myself. I'm just highlighting what's in your strategic plan that you approved and that is in place now.
I like it.
Yeah. I like it. This is also, I mean, ultimately, it's an internal document, so I don't think, I mean, I understand your point about the public, but
Sorry, just a reminder about microphones, yeah.
Should wire us.
Yeah.
there's no post-it here, so.
And this is my effort just to summarize at a high level for this 2-hour meeting.
Teresa gave
A
me
lot of
hers.
stuff.
It won't help.
I know. Well, it's a long day. All of these microphones are going to lose battery if we keep them on. Anyway, yeah, I like it.
Okay, we have a few more slides, and Kelly?
Okay. So moving on to our forecasted 2024 net position. Trying to be a little bit more conservative on the FBO revenue. Again, this is very high level. We'll get more in detail at the next meeting on this. But the major change you'll notice is that we don't have any FAA grant revenue slated for 2024. So big change from this year.
I have a question, and it might be really obvious to, it's on. I'm gonna hit you with it.
Put the trigger there.
It doesn't bend either, so. Might be sort of a simple question, but I'd like to bring it up. Where does the cash go that is depreciation? Because you have it in here. It's a paper thing.
Right, and it's always a part of the calculation to get to net income. And each year.
I know that, I'm just wondering, you
It's
know,
a journal
if we
entry,
have
essentially.
$10 million in revenue and $10 million in expenses and $2.5 million is depreciation, where does that $2.5 million go? In actual cash dollars?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
It's a journal entry to decrease the
If
useful
we,
life of that or the asset itself, and then it's an expense on the.
if we had a reserve policy, you
It should
might
be
take
equal
that,
to
you
that.
might take that 2.5 million and put it in that
Right.
reserve bank account.
I actually agree with
Stay
that. It's
tuned.
really easy math. Clearly, it's
Any other
depreciating.
questions? So now we are moving on to what was written out in the new reserve policy, just talking about the federal and state policies on use of funds. As requested, we added the language that comes after the ... here. It will be also in the other one. And then some points down below there that are pulled from policy instruction 311.
On this particular item, who overrules? FAA or state?
Josh has
Really? Yeah.
It depends on the dollars. So the federal dollars have to comply with the FAA grants, but then anything that's an airport dollar has to comply with the state rules. So
And
this-
not the FAA? So it's-
They also, potentially also, right? So all of our dollars have to comply, if they come through the FAA, have to comply with FAA requirements and then also state requirements. If it's just state dollars, it just has to comply with state requirements.
So, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place, but reading what Mary threw up on the state constitution, the second part of that, which wasn't what you brought up, said, it's, nothing written here shall prohibit us from helping a veteran who served in the services. Well, obviously, we can't give FAA dollars to a veteran.
No, so that section is really technical, and it's been interpreted over the years by the courts and the Attorney General, and it's been interpreted to the point that for our purposes, the interpretations are more important than the actual text of the Constitution on that regard. And the big takeaway for us on the text of the Constitution is that any expenditures of the airport have to serve a public purpose, and our public purpose is defined by what we lawfully can do, which generally is everything that's set forth in the Airport Districts Act. So, applying it to a veteran, we potentially could help a veteran, provided it fell within some other program that we were doing that was airport related. So, later this afternoon, we're going to be talking about a community partnership program. There are a number of programs there which fit within the state definition of a public purpose or an airport purpose, but may not be, wouldn't necessarily be a permissible use of FAA grant assurance dollars.
Got it. Thanks.
And Rob, you want to add anything on that?
I was just going to cover quickly, but if that answers your question, I mean, three sources of funds for us. The easiest ones are AIP, FAA grant revenue. That's FAA rules. That's the first bullet point up here. We have to follow that. Only can you use for that specific project, essentially. The other category money of the three is airport revenue that's earned on the airport side, or leases that are set up by the airport for our land. That is considered airport revenue, so it follows the first bullet point guideline. We can only use it on for airport purposes, for expenses. The third category of revenue is our tax-based revenue, and that's the second and third bullet points here, which talks about how you can use that, and that's what Josh was talking about in the second half of his comments. There is guidance provided under those California codes. There is a legal interpretation which plays out mostly in our policy instruction 311 about use of tax revenue. But at the end of the day, based on that guidance of guardrails, this is a board of directors' decisions and discretion within the guidance of legal counsel about how to best use tax revenue funds. So it's more broad than the FAA revenue is, right?
So on this sheet, then I assume we will be cleaning up the second bullet to be consistent, right? So that it is completely captured. The quotation will be clarified. It
Yeah,
should be.
I believe the feedback we got on that was to not include the first part of that bullet point as quotations because it's a citation from our memo, but for the last sentence there, which is a direct quote from the Public Utility Code, to add the last piece of that section, which refers, and I don't have the language on the top of my head, to
It's on there.
the entire community and to uniform benefit. Yep.
Okay. And we have grant
Oh,
assurance
thanks.
25.
I
which
can't
talks-
see that well.
Here we have the grant assurance 25, which is all revenues generated by the airport and local taxes from airport airfields fuel sales. I think that could be valuable to have grant assurance 24 in here as well, which talks about self-sustaining as possible, and the exclusive rights. That's in our strategic plan, but is that
Right.
something to emphasize as well?
Yeah, and again, this is meant to be a presentation here today. It wasn't meant to be covering every grant assurance, every regulation or state regulation.
I understand.
It's just the top level things to think about as we're talking about budget and prioritization. Certainly our strategic plan, the board has adopted points specifically to grant assurances that we must follow, all the grant assurances. So this will, this presentation is not the budget. This is just helping shape the conversation.
So will this be included in the budget? Is this a sheet that we can see in the budget?
This is not the budget. This is the presentation.
So this is not going to be, when the budget, when we get that next
We're
month?
we're not going to have this presentation as part of the budget, right? This
Okay.
is to inform the conversation today.
Okay. And just in clarification, because, you've added these bullets at the end of things that we can spend money on, and that was asking to Josh about, does the money only have to be spent on the airport? Because the reserve funds, the way that's set up, it looks like it's only on the airport. And there might be places where we have reserve funds, like, that we might want to do things off the airport. And that's not being captured. And, for example, we spent, and we probably expensed it when we bought Wattle Ranch at $3 million, when we put that in.
It's an asset.
That was an expense that, rather than, that was capitalized?
Yes, it's an asset. It's
Okay.
land we own.
So if you're going to capitalize a big purchase of land, then it would be something that would be in a reserve rather than expensed. Isn't that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yep.
So, like the example of putting money in an escrow account for NAHAS, which is still sitting there, is that an expense or is that a capitalized?
That was an expense because it was part of the,
And it's still sitting in escrow,
Gift.
so. So that's my question of clarity in terms of having some aspect of community in here, expenditures and reserve.
Yeah, and so most of the expenditures that we talk about year to year are on the operating expense side as a year-to-year thing.
Okay,
We can talk about expenditures as capital investments, I'll call it. It probably wouldn't be a reserve, unless it's our asset, right? That's benefiting the community that we're going to maintain. Then it would be a reserve item. If it's something that is bigger and different that we don't own or control, that we are investing in a concept that we want to reserve money for, it would probably fall in the development bucket, I would call it, as we're defining it here, and we'll go on those slides in a minute. That we would make sure that the money that we put in there, or that we move out of our tax-based money, can be spent out in the community. So as we put the money in these different buckets, we'll talk about in a minute, these different reserve accounts, these different accounts for segregation of funds, we want to be very careful when we put them in certain buckets, you can only take them out to use
That
for
matter.
certain things. So we just have to be very clear about what our future plans of investment are, so that we are putting the right kind of money in the right bucket so that we can use it the way we want to in the future.
because I'm looking at some of these and looking at what was in Josh's thing about transportation purposes. There could conceivably be a large expenditure to help with transportation. There could conceivably, we're putting money towards workforce housing, and I'm assuming that that's going to be an expensed item as part of that lot instead of fire. That was one of the ideas.
And the workforce housing, it depends on how we spend that money, right? If we're buying a house that we're gonna let employees live in, then when we're buying a house, that's gonna be something we own. It's gonna be an asset that we're gonna
Right.
maintain. So it'll have reserve components to it after we buy it.
Okay.
So it depends on how on the housing piece, how we invest that. We decide to engage in a home buyer assistance program, that would probably be an expense.
Okay.
Depending on how we structure that and when it's due for payback at some point. So there's a lot of in the weeds details for each of these scenarios that you're talking about. Part of getting it right is the next few slides. We're talking about on a high level here today, the creation of these different reserve funds essentially, and then we can talk about what's appropriate in each budget cycle about how we assign the expected revenue to what buckets.
Okay.
It's a deliberate approach, so we can use it the way that we have developed plans that we want to use it.
Okay.
So I'll read through slide 11, but Lauren, if you wouldn't mind going to the next one with the graphic, I think this will help kind of go through it a little bit better. So we have our three distinct sources of funds: our airport revenue, grant revenue, and property tax revenue. the next line down is the 4 different bank accounts that we are going to create starting January 1. So we've got our airport operating account. All airport revenue goes there. FAA grant, everything grant goes there. You'll see an arrow coming from the operating side for our 10% if a grant happens to have a match piece of that. So we'll put that over there. Property tax.
Going back one, because we went, going back one slide. Can we go back one slide? There we go. So the third bullet, property tax account pays for expenses, will fund the airport operating account and reserve account. Isn't that where we are also paying for projects in the community per PI 311, or doing something for fire or transportation or housing?
Yes, and that's so for any airport, for any expenses, so that covers that.
So that operating account is for expenses, is what you're saying?
Yeah, PI 311 would be considered an expense that we are, on the most part,
And
we're investing in an asset.
why is it that property taxes are the only monies that fund reserves?
Right. Which is the next chart.
It is both, it's both.
It's both.
It's,
Yeah, it is.
Reserve bank account doesn't have any airport revenue in it.
it does.
Well, the graphic doesn't.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's why I was trying to talk through the
Oh, I
graphic.
got it, the underneath, got it. You're moving money around.
Yes.
Got it.
Keep going, Kelly.
Yep.
Those arrows.
Okay. So I don't know where we were. Property tax, bank account. So taxes go in there. You can see from the orange lines that those can go to fund reserves. They can go to the airport bank account. I don't know how to use that. And then the reserve bank account is where we will put money from property taxes, from the airport money, to fund our future reserve projects. And the triangles on the bottom are, if you think about it from a check run perspective, any airport expenses are going to come out of here, grants there. Any expenses can be paid out of property tax dollars, and the reserve projects will come out of there in the reserve side. So we're going to be funding that each month in order to keep our reserve levels to where what we agree the targeted levels that we want. But we also have to then pay for the items that we complete out of there so that we can keep that fund balance. Any questions on my arrows?
It's,
It's a lot more complicated than just one account,
yeah, but it's more clear.
but it's really required.
Yep.
It's required, it's
It'll
more
be
clear,
very
and,
clear as to what's being paid from where.
right, and something I've asked.
So really, the left to the right is the most restrictive to the least restrictive.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
Then we were talking about the reserve projects.
Once they become commingled in the reserve account, does that become an issue? You know, you've got property tax money in there, and then also airport operating money coming over, and they become commingled,
Sorry, what do you think?
and then is there,
So we need to be real
Potential.
clear about what we're gonna fund in the way of reserves. I would say 99.9% of existing reserves is airside, needs to be funded by airside revenue or grant revenue. I think we'd have to really work to find a good example, unless there's one in the future, of us having an asset off the airport that would be something we want to maintain with airport revenue in addition to tax revenue.
What about like the
'Cause we
heliport
could, right?
in Tahoe City?
Airport would be something that we would maintain with airport revenue.
But it is off airport and not our asset.
It's on our ALP, it's part of our infrastructure here as an airport.
Like the beacons we have.
Beacons, good example, right? Wattle Ranch is probably an example of an asset that we have that would need to be maintained as an expense, not a reserve item, out of our property tax money, because it is not specific to the airport, even though it exists on sheet 11 of our airport layout plan. The guidance that I'm getting from our aviation council and our recent FAA inspection is that is kind of a gray area, and we encourage you to err on the side of something you acquired with non-airport revenue money, you maintain it with non-airport revenue money, just to be very clear. So as we accumulate assets outside of the airport, and we want to maintain those assets, we need to make sure we're identifying how much that's going to be taken away from our property tax revenue.
You know the one where you listed out revenue, the pie chart? Do you have this overlaid on that, like where all those dollars are? Do you know what I'm saying?
Currently,
Like
but I can make one, yeah.
specifically airport operating bank account revenue is these three pieces of the pie or something like that.
It's essentially like when we look at the P&L that we'll go over at the next meeting, that top, everything but property taxes is basically the left two boxes. But I can make something that
Now that
kind of
makes sense.
encompasses them both.
That totally works.
Okay,
Tax dollars go on this side, everything else goes on that side.
you got it.
Okay.
It's something that maybe will come up more through the master plan process, but the old ALP had all of our properties as fee simple rather than as acquired from the federal government, which puts us in a different realm. And I would like some sort of analysis. At one point, I was told as a board member that, oh, no, you can never get away. And yet there are airports that are getting away. They're paying off their FAA loans and they're getting away. And I'm just putting that out there in terms of if all of our property has been acquired by property taxes, and fee simple, we're in a different realm. And I'm just wondering if that's kind of on your horizon at some point to look at.
I would say my current horizon is the strategic plan, and that is not currently identified in the strategic plan, but it's certainly something that we have information on. Obviously, with our recent inspection, land use inspection from the FAA, we're waiting to get the results of that inspection. I think if the board wants to go down that road of further investigation of the status of our land, because you either want to move away from accepting FAA money or grant assurances or taking control of, being closed at night as an airport or certain operating hours. If that's something the board would like to do, then certainly we can look into that and address that. But as far as my work plan and something I plan on focusing on, it's not currently on the work plan that you all have given me as part of our strategic plan.
I'd be kind of curious, given the ALP. I don't know if anybody else is curious of that.
Not on my horizon. I like their money
And the rules.
and their rules. I'm okay with that.
My feeling on that is just that because we can't prevent a future board from undoing that, it's not a good investment, because then we sacrifice flexibility on the funding that we've got now with regard to community investment, because then we need all that money for airport operations. And then a future board comes in and takes $1 from the FAA and reverses the entire process. So if there's no way of preventing that from going back in the future, I wouldn't trust it, because I think it's kind of analogous to what I think what Teresa was saying about the reserve funds. Like, are we saving up money for a future board to do something that we would not have done with that money? And I think buying off grant assurances is a similar endeavor.
Any other questions on this picture?
It's very kindergarten that I can't quite grasp. I'm kidding.
So back to the reserve policy categories. So here's the big four: cash operating contingency, new machinery and equipment, replacement reserves, and development. Any questions on what those are? I think we've given some examples.
I'm just wondering, 6 months of operating capital, and I asked you this the other day, have we ever not been able to pay our bills? And so 6 months, and you said, no, we've always, it got a little tight, but tight still meant $5 or $6 million. So here, I'm just wondering, is 6 months operating capital an appropriate number, or more like 3 months?
Is this the right time to talk about that, or is it coming up later?
Because they're
Yeah.
coming back with the
I
budget.
think, from my perspective, there's no right answer for this. This is, we're trying to, in all the categories of reserves, it's a matter of how confident or comfortable do you feel with saving money for the future for unknown. On the part of replacement reserve and new machinery, there are known items. We have studies, we know what our current assets
Right.
are, we know what the cost is to maintain or replace. So those are fairly known quantities, so reserving at the right level, that you have enough money that you can do the next couple of years, as opposed to the entire 100% reserve, $28 million, probably don't need that level. And to David's point, maybe you're creating a giant nest egg for someone else to decide what to do with, because it's unrestricted. For cash contingency, it's really about the unknown, and it would be targeted around 6 months of our next year's operating expenses. So if we had something that hasn't happened here, that we haven't forecasted, a giant wildfire burns through the area, and we're not able to operate the airport. We lose all of our airport revenue, but we probably don't want to lay off the whole staff, because we'd have to, try to rehire a whole nother staff. So we'd want to have enough money to cover at least 6 months of our biggest expense, which is payroll, as part of our operating expenses, out of our property tax base, assuming there's no interruption in that supply. It could be that the wildfire doesn't hit here, and there's smoke in the area for a long period of time, much like we had winter weather in the area here for 6 months of the year, and we were closed 30 days, 45 days last winter? 32 days. Major interruption in our air travel, but also our airport side revenue source here. Major disruption, and we see that in our current budget. We're over 2.5 million short of what we thought we'd be at for revenue, and that's based on this lack of operating time. So it's these unknowns. It's a new pandemic that impacts us. All of a sudden, all private general aviation traffic stops. It's a 9/11 kind of event. And just that side of our revenue just dries up and goes away. What do? We only have half our revenue, or 43% of our revenue, in the way of our property tax that comes in not all at once, but over time. And it's the idea that we have some money banked away there, whether it's 6 months, 4 months, a year. I don't think there's a perfect number, but the idea that we actually have some cash contingency reserves is, I think, the important concept that we want to put in place here.
We were concerned about that in 2000 when COVID hit, and we were really concerned about how we would do on that, and we actually did better because more people came to get away from the city centers. So if we do 6 months, what's the number on that? How many dollars is that?
6 million.
Pardon me?
6 million.
Thank you.
And just for reference to, on the old PI 309 designating unrestricted net assets under general fund operating contingency, we notated in the older policy that we would like to have 6 months operating cash flow. It's written in the old one as well, so.
Where is that 6 million we're holding? In our bank account?
Currently, yes.
It's laddered in short-term investments, so we can liquidate it quickly. But that's probably still a 5% return.
So we have that money now. 6 months of, we have 6 million somewhere.
We do.
Relatively liquid.
Yes.
And in that old 309, it was 6 months cash flow estimated at 4 million, but things have changed.
Because that's from
CPI.
2020.
Yeah.
10%.
But 6 months is, that's,
Which bank account would we put that in
yeah.
of your
The
four?
reserve.
In the reserve.
The reserve.
But we invested in something like Cal Class.
Yeah, that'd be a great example of a California
Yeah,
class.
short-term investment, 5% plus return currently, that is completely secure.
Highly liquid.
Kelly, I know you weren't in this position way back. You probably weren't even born. But, 2008, when we all got property tax, I don't know, forgiveness or whatever, it was, our property taxes were lowered. Did the revenue here go down?
Guaranteed.
How much? Do we know?
I don't know how much. I can look.
But it's based on assessed property tax. It would
Yeah, I
have
know.
gone down,
Right.
obviously.
I have it here if you
I'm
really
just
want to
wondering.
know.
So- Yeah,
Yeah.
another example.
I have
of-
a historical table I can look at.
I'm pretty sure I was at the fire district then, and it was
Pretty good.
brutal.
Yeah. Any other questions on the slide?
When are we gonna grind through what we think these numbers should be?
In 3, 4 more slides?
Yep.
3 or 4 more minutes? Okay, let's
In,
go.
under development where we have parking lots and community facility,
It's
those
just
are,
an idea. It's an idea.
Concepts, yeah.
Ideas.
Just
Big
an
ideas.
example.
and there's
to
other
define it.
ideas of buying land or rehabilitate, if we were to buy land and you're telling me that it's through, you would not expense it, then that's not on here as an idea.
These are just ideas
Okay.
of what they could
It's
be.
the focus.
Yeah.
I'm trying to throw out ideas.
It's not comprehensive, it's just to educate the kindergartner.
We'll have an idea slide here in a couple more slides to collect all these ideas.
Okay.
Just the number, sorry, well, it was 2008, we took a 4-year hit and about $500,000. So we were getting 4.5 million in 2009. And then it went to like 4.2, 4, and then it started to go back up. So it's a small hit, 4 years of flat line.
Pretty impressive aviation guy getting those numbers quickly.
No, it's in an old budget document. I have it all memorized.
Rain Man.
I can't compete with that.
Okay, so this starts to get into the methodology behind the reserve policy. So right off the bat, replacement reserves, that comes directly from the plan that was done, or the study, excuse me, in June when they came out here and looked at every single thing we have, assessed valuation, and came back and gave us some numbers. So that's the thing that we were talking about earlier, where it says to do $1 bazillion, and then we woe it back to what we think is possible and necessary. You know, the example of the warehouse roof we talked about for a long time, that, you know, if we're going to tear the thing down, do we want to do that? And some of those items get bumped.
And so for cash and operating expenses, we should have reserve on that because we need to pay the bills. But for replacement and new machinery and equipment, we can borrow all that. I just want to throw that out there for everybody's thought process. Because we have guaranteed revenue, it's really, really easy and inexpensive for us to borrow, so we don't need to save as much for
Yep.
future boards to spend.
Which we don't have in much in those categories, yeah. And so the cash, the new machinery and equipment, and the development are all determined in the budget process. And what we're doing right now is just back to the kind of methodology of the policy itself. And then that replacement reserve, that's dictated by the actual study and the plan there, just so it's clear as to where these numbers are coming from. So we'll look at those other ones each year in the budget process, and, you know, like if we were looking at buying a loader or something like that, that would be in that bucket.
I was just going to ask about that loader that Kevin wanted that we said no on. Did you ever get that?
Just did not. We
Remember
might
when
be
we
asking
said
again
no?
here. Yeah.
So we actually have a draft application for AIG funding that we've identified. We don't know that we're going to meet the criteria to get the money from the FAA for that. So we tentatively have it drafted in the budget for next year because it looks like the FAA will not fund it. So
And we've made
despite
it-
our best efforts to go down that road, it's not made in the USA, I understand.
Yep.
Not enough of it was made in the US, it doesn't qualify.
To get AIP money.
To
it
get the
has to be
federal
made
money
here.
to buy it.
Noteworthy, though, that somehow we made it through without the new loader.
Yeah.
But we
past
do
few
get
years.
150. But we do get 150 from the FAA every year, don't we?
We do, that's AIP money, and we were gonna spend AIG money, which is a different category of money for us to use on a variety of things. I just wanna answer your question or your comment, Teresa, about borrowing money. Nothing in here prohibits us as a strategy based on the project to borrow money. You can save money, and wait to do things, or you can borrow money and do them sooner. We can absolutely, depending on the project, typically bigger projects, I would say, than stuff that's in the reserve, they're usually the smaller dollar items. But for anything we put in this development category particularly, I think we should always have that conversation. If we're gonna tear down a whole hangar row and build a new one, do we wanna save the money or do we want to borrow part of the money and pay it back? I agree, yeah.
You know what I do for a living, right?
Yes, I do,
Okay. Leverage.
Which we did on the
Leverage.
executive hangars.
Yep.
yes, and we're still paying.
Right.
Perfectly viable way to do things,
OPM.
yes.
Speaking of capital projects, here we are. So these are some items we had carryover from 2023. You'll notice they're categorized by the categories we just talked about. So development, new machinery and equipment, replacement reserve. There's a few items that are called out specifically from the replacement reserves because they were carryover from last year. But that 1.3 that you see there is from the reserve study, and throwing out the EAA stuff and the hangar things, the big things that, again, it's the Band-Aid versus build new question mark.
When I met with you the other day, I talked about we should have something about runway assessment for Sequanipa. We should set aside some money for that, depending on if we do something or which way we go. So there should be money. That's probably in the several $100,000 figure. The other one is
Study.
the Wattle Ranch entrance. That's just to do a design. And
Yeah,
six,
we've updated this slide from the original presentation we provided you, and we've taken that particular project out as a recommended project for next year.
okay. The Jet SAF fuel farm, this is 300 to get a new tank. So then we would have 4 jet fuel.
Correct.
Or SAF tanks. And we have 1 low lead tank.
Correct.
And then somewhere in here, in the plan, there was a 300,000 to put a new skid in as well for another fuel farm, 450,000 to replace a fuel pump skid. So is that 450 from here?
What year was that in? Is it a recommended replacement year?
It's record for 2024.
It's a part of that 1302 100.
Because the whole reserves for 2024 added up to 3.9 million.
Right,
And if
and I
I
took
take out the
all the
EAA,
stuff.
that takes out $500,000.
And the hangars.
Huh?
I can tell you what the 1302 is if you'd like to know. But
Yeah,
the
which-
450 is included in that for the skid.
It's not, the 450 is not in that.
It is.
It is. So so now we'd have 4 fuel tanks for jet traffic and 1 for the small pistons.
Jet
And-
fuel.
Huh?
Tanks for jet fuel.
Yes, jet and SAF. So, and you explained to me how that's an aspect of getting access, that SAF is only so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
And in my mind, I'm like thinking, and I talked to you about it, but I want to put this in my other board member's mind.
Sure.
Was, I had asked why we don't get, after you and I went to the Noise and Air Emissions conference, why we don't get another low lead tank that's no lead, because that fuel is available. It's not very common, it's hard to get, but why would we not choose to do it sooner? It's in the plan to be heading that way. And you were saying it's 3 to 4 years out.
Yeah, I think we identified that as part of our goals in our strategic plan is to transition on the low
And-
lead question away from low lead to a unleaded fuel.
Correct.
There are some half or less than half solutions out there right now for fuel that's good for some of the piston aircraft, but not all. It requires new infrastructure. It requires certification with the aircraft and the engine. It's very involved.
Right.
I believe, and I know, and I think I've sent the board some information on this, there is a new drop-in solution for low lead and unleaded fuel. It's just been approved by the FAA. It's coming to market. I expect it'll hit the market, and either that or a competitor that's a complete drop-in replacement over the next 2 years, if not sooner. So rather than investing in a partial solution that doesn't solve the issue, I believe we're probably on a similar, from the time we permit that and actually do it, it'd probably be a year, at least 2 years out. I think we're gonna be in a situation where we're gonna have a drop-in unleaded solution that will be able to use the same tank that we have to solve our needs. And our current tank capacity has met our needs for a while. We haven't seen an increase in that area.
Okay.
In the
And-
SAF tank addition, and I've mentioned this as part of the strategic plan conversation, but just for everybody else's knowledge, We are located in a proximity to the terminals where we get the sustainable aviation fuel in the Bay Area, which is a huge advantage for us. But it's still a drive in I-80. It's still a competition at a low volume facility with a lot of competition to get that type of fuel. We've been very lucky through nothing more than sheer luck and the diligence of our staff with the hauler to get it on a regular fashion to fill our tanks in the way we need it in order to meet our traffic demands here. It's only one big snowstorm, one road interruption, a sick driver, competition at the rack being closed for 10 days, that we are subject to a lot of variability that we can eliminate by adding an additional tank here to hold additional capacity here to meet our demand that's here now for sustainable aviation fuel without having to switch back to Jet A fuel, which is always in well supply. But if the route is interrupted, which is certainly a possibility as we see traffic, if you commute around here at all, back and forth to the Bay Area, it's a reality. So this is an investment not only in our infrastructure here and our capacity, but takes out of all the potential supply chain interruptions to meet our customer needs and to stay sustainable, to be honest.
Mine. I'm first. Rick. As I understood you, you weren't objecting to his tank. You were probably asking, and I would ask the same question, is there some efficiency when you dig a hole and put a new tank in to put two in?
We're going to do this above ground,
Yeah,
is the
above
additional
ground.
tank in an existing fuel farm that has a containment system that's all above ground. There's enough room in there, and we're going through all the specs and codes to add the additional tank. So adding a tank beyond that, we don't have capacity for. We have some temporary solutions that we can do, but it would only be temporary with a lot of coordination to have trucks on site, and then it's a different.
So there's no cost efficiency to do them at the same time?
There's not.
Okay, good enough for me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And we would end up using the low lead for the no lead when we finally.
We'd use the same tank, whether
Yeah.
it's required to clean or not. The current main product is a drop-in solution. You wouldn't have to clean the tank or change it at all.
Drop in, meaning use the
Drop
same
in,
tank.
it uses the same tank, using the same aircraft. There's no special modifications required on either end of the use. That's what sustainable aviation fuel is. We put it in the same tank as the Jet A, it puts it in the aircraft without any additional modifications for the aircraft. Yeah. So
And-
a drop-in solution is an industry term.
Yeah.
Plug and play?
Plug and play.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm just bringing up the idea of 4 tanks of jet fuel. It's, we used to have 1 tank of low lead and 2 of jet fuel. And now we have 3 of jet fuel. And now we're going to have 4 of jet fuel. And that goes back to what kind of an airport we want to be. And I'm just throwing that out there so we can
You're
all-
suggesting we're becoming a jet port? Is that what you just said?
I didn't say that. I was just saying, what kind of an airport do we want
I
to
don't
be?
think it changes anything. I mean, we don't want to run out of gas.
Well, you wouldn't run out of gas because you'd still have regular Jet A. You wouldn't have the SAF, but you would have Jet A. If a plane came in, it always has its reserves, and it can go on to Reno to get Jet A or SAF down there. But I'm just saying, questioning, what do we want to be? Do we?
Well, I mean, I'm going to vote for the revenue on the gas. I don't want them to go, we don't buy from us.
There is that.
There's another benefit that I got to figure out how to use these microphones that Teresa mentioned. If we have more capacity, and we would do this in DOD when prices are low, you can buy. To right now, we have to buy because we have an 8-ounce glass. So we're always topping it off. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. And back to the unleaded for the piston aircraft. With SAF, we're only offering 100% SAF here. You don't get a choice between Jet A, which is cheaper, or SAF. If we offered both, my assumption is we would be selling a lot of Jet A and a little bit of SAF. If we offer unleaded fuel and leaded for the pistons, because we'd have to in the intervening couple of years, my assumption is that most of the general aviation pilots would buy the cheaper leaded fuel as opposed to the unleaded fuel. And there's about a 50 cent to $1.50 bump if you buy the unleaded avgas. So I think there's a dynamic there as well, that we'd buy the infrastructure, and I think most of our private pilots would go with the cheaper gas. With the jet fuel, we only offer SAF, so they don't get a choice. So that's a dynamic to consider.
I just as a piston aircraft owner, I'm always up for the cheapest gas, and it would be, if it was a big difference, it would be difficult to justify that. And is it fair to look at this as going to what Mary's point is about what kind of airfield we want to be? The fact that we're 100% sustainable aviation fuel to me is awesome right now. And I'm looking at that, this is a $300,000 investment to make sure that we can maintain that.
Right.
So because I think it's true, if we do have Jet A, that's what we're going to sell. It's not, I don't think that there's many who are going to say opt for the more expensive mixture if the other one is available. So if this is an insurance policy, I think that does go to the kind of airport we want to be.
So I had 2 jet pilots who I know well have suggested we're trying to run jets out of here with our fuel policy. So that's absolutely the opposite. And they say they go elsewhere to get stuff. Now, we've caught them getting it here too. Observed, pardon me, not caught. And I've commented on that, and then they talk about landing fees and things like this, so everybody complains. And I would like to get a detailed breakdown of the 1.3021,
Yeah, absolutely.
because I'd like to know what's in there.
And just a reminder, one of our guiding principles here, we are an industry leader in sustainable aviation. And to me, to be that, we make investment decisions around maintaining that status. And what I'm recommending is that's an additional tank.
Just to clarify, with the 3 tanks that we've got now, we're not at capacity in terms of we can't, like, we're not looking at tank number 4 because we want to pump more. We're not at that point with 3 tanks now, right? Anyway, right? You're talking about supply chain. You're not talking about capacity.
Yes. For example, where we get the rack, they call it, where we get the fuel from, goes down for maintenance from time to time. We were informed the other day it was going down for 10 days. So if that 10 days is in a busy period for us, we will quickly deplete all of our fuel of SAF and not be able to restock it. So adding in a tank gives us more flexibility to absorb those supply chain interruptions, right? Without having to switch back to Jet A. Right.
All right, any questions on that? No. Now, because we're done at 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's get to the.
Yeah, let's go to, yeah. No, slide number 18. I think this is where we need to spend some time. So, this is talking about your big ideas.
Yeah, you saw on the development fund slide earlier, there was an asterisk next to some concepts of development fund, and they're all subject to, these are the big idea, big cost things. It's not a replacement reserve piece and part. It's not new machinery, new loader. It is the big audacious ideas of things we want to develop, whether it's a whole hangar row, whether it's a new concept we haven't even thought about yet. We really want to get your all's idea that fits with the strategic plan guidance that we'd go through a deliberate process to begin collecting these ideas and see how we can massage these in the budget. We will provide, it's in the list of replacement reserve for next year, the 1.3 million, but the specific list that we're calling out as part of that 1.3 million we'll send separately. But separate from the reserve listed items, we really want to capture your all's idea about important big investment. Whether I've heard a lot of ideas, you've addressed these in the past, whether it's a community hangar, whether it's a new EAA building, whether it's a new SOAR building that's in our leased property on the other side of the runway, or something in our vacant property, or some other idea that is maybe less airside and more community side as a major investment. So love your feedback at this point. If that is enough framing of concepts to give me your list of ideas.
I don't have a list of ideas. I have
okay.
another question. If money were no object, what could we invest in that would make us safer? You all can answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn to Jeff first, and it's not our own aircraft.
I would get tractors and remove all the mountains.
Okay, fair.
For things that we're allowed to.
Yeah, I think, yes. a bigger runway, 0220 or a really big 1634, but I think there's some land constraints. Probably the single biggest thing we could do would be a larger crosswind runway of 0220, lengthen and widen, which the board has been talking about for a number of years. I think that's,
Thanks, Jim.
yeah.
Sure.
Sorry,
go ahead,
I just
Kat.
wanted to ask,
Yeah.
how about some of the stuff that Larry had talked about in the tower presentation?
I think would help. I don't think it's game changing.
Okay.
If done correctly, they're minor things. We're still looking and getting the FIDCO. The other one, the FAA will say no to us, and even if we purchased it, they won't let us plug into that system.
Oh, okay.
But I think the FIDO would be helpful, but it's not a game changing technology. It's not a game changing safety, but I think it's something we could do. Yeah.
So I'm going to just preface this a little bit by thinking about the strategic plan and the benefit, the fact that we are a massive district. We're not just Truckee, so we have to think about what is going on at the lake, and I think that we have to think about benefits that are not only to the airport users but to non-airport users. Philosophically, for me, the number one threat to this entire region is fire. I'm not sure what number two is, but it's a distant number two, in my opinion, and I know this in the opinion of others as well. I do share Teresa's, the concerns she had voiced earlier about, as we amass a war chest, are we setting up a future board to do something that we would not have wanted to do with the money that was provided by our constituents today? That's a little bit of a concern for me. I'm also concerned about what that turns the airport board elections into, in terms of people thinking that it's about getting a hold of that pot. I appreciate the idea of the reserves, and I do agree that this is an important thing. I would like to focus more about what we want to do while allowing for that. And one of the things that I would like to pose for the board here is that I did have a conversation with Bill Saline, who's the former chief of Truckee Fire Protection District, and one of the people responsible for the Measure T program. And I know that there's no similar program to the other fire districts that are in the region. So I asked him about, like, how do we do that? Like, how do we get that? And he said, and this was a quote that he allowed me to say, each of the fire districts in the airport district have completed and routinely update a community wildfire prevention plan that details the priorities of the projects and fire prevention work in their district, of which much won't get done because of lack of funding. And what I would propose to this board is that we allocate $2 million a year to fire prevention programs throughout our district, indefinitely, off the top, because I think that is the number one threat to our region. I think it's the number one threat to our airport. When we talk about disaster, we talked about fire coming through here, and rather than thinking in terms of having reserves to prepare ourselves to survive it, I would like to make investments to prevent it. So I'd like to just leave that on the table and see what people think of that.
Would you put that on the land side?
Can we do that, Josh? Is that legal?
We put that in the land side as tax dollar use for that. We couldn't use airport revenue for that, but it is listed under, in large sense, under the.
I think there would be a lot of those. We'd have to look at each project, but I think a substantial number of those projects would be eligible.
Eligible for what?
The money.
Use of airport funds.
Ah, shocking. He says we can do it.
I know. Can I ask another, I'm going to go back to my depreciation question. If I have 10 $100 bills as revenue, and 8 of those are used for expenses and 2 of them are depreciation, I give you 8 to pay the bills, what happens to the other 2 in cash? I don't care about your journal entry. Yes, I have a minor in accounting. I get that. Where does the cash go?
It's decreased, our operating expenses are decreased, or increased, sorry. I'll draw you a picture for you.
But isn't depreciation more about an asset?
Yeah, the value of that asset goes down. Yeah.
I know what it is. I know exactly what it is. Like I said,
Right?
I have a minor in accounting. I get the concept. I'm just thinking along the lines of, if we have 2.5 million in depreciation every year, why don't we put those dollar bills into a reserve or a fire prevention, or where are the dollars? That's what I want to know.
They're in the big bucket, in the operating account.
That sounds like double dipping. You're gonna have to show me.
I'll draw you a picture.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, I'd like
better
the
picture.
too.
And I think we have,
We all
depending on the
have
level of funding, I think we have existing resources right now to fund reserves without, and then we have to maintain them and still do other big things. I think there'll be enough money left.
I mean,
Yeah.
we already have the 6 million, which is important. The rest I think we could borrow. I'm not too concerned about that. Maybe we want to save 20% of it or whatever. But I like David's idea. We've all got some ideas. We haven't gotten to anyone else's yet. And year to date, based on the financials, we are 2.7 million in the green. And that's way under budget. So every year we have all this money. And I think it's marginally offensive to the other special districts in the area to look at our balance sheet and go, we're starving over here and look at you guys, you know?
The other things that I forgot to mention in there is Bill was explaining to me that when they have absolute funding sources, they can apply for matching grants to exponentially increase that amount of money. They just don't have those funds to rely on to be able to make part of their application processes.
I'm finished.
I'm not sure the other special districts are so poor.
Fire districts are.
Yes,
And that's what we're talking about. The fire districts are.
I'm actually next week having breakfast with your chief at North Tahoe.
He's gonna beg for money. That's all they
No,
ever
that's
do.
not what he's doing. We're talking about the Meeks Bay unfunded liability, which I addressed at LAFCO last month. Anyway, I am still would like to suggest that we put in some preliminary study money on widening and lengthening 220. I'm not asking for a vote that we do that. I said it at the last meeting that I thought the thing that we could do most to decrease the noise and annoyance off of 29 would be to get more people to fly off of 220. And several months ago, David Diamond proposed or suggested, and we seem to all agree with that when the reconstruction of 220 finishes at Halloween, that we have a program in place to encourage people to use that. But I would also like to go a little farther and spend some money, not a lot, to see what the issues are on widening extended.
Safer.
Pardon me?
It's safer. That's what they said. The single biggest thing we could do.
Yeah,
Well,
we can
Chief-
certainly, the next step on 220 for widening extending would be to do design and environmental work to see what that looks like, see if it's possible.
Well, I'd like to see that started.
So we would program money around those two things.
It's not a vote to do it,
I know,
it's to
I'm
figure
just
it
saying
out.
that's how I have translated for budget for next year. And there's a lot of process involved in that, even after you do design. If you budget design and environmental dollars, when that comes back,
How much are we talking about?
no more than $500,000, 500,000.
Well, I'd like to do that.
I don't know, I don't have a number. The
I
design should be
I
fairly
understand.
cheap. The environmental will be more.
I'd like to do that next year, that's my opinion. The other thing on the air side is something we tried, and it got so out of hand we dropped it, was replacing Hangar 2. Very inexpensively. Right now, we use Alpha 9 for a lot of stuff, airside wise, that we could build Hangar 2 and use that hangar for that equipment, and we could get Alpha 9 again for revenue and putting a plane in or putting planes in, et cetera. we really went crazy, and we ended up with a $12 million thing because we just kept sticking stuff in there. And I'm suggesting something very simple, nothing exotic, canned hangar. And
Okay.
when we put it in place, extend the green space to
Between
it.
us and that, right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
I'm-
so I would add design money in for a new hangar that's very purpose-built for ground support equipment. And that fits with the strategic plan.
canned,
It's,
nothing fancy.
Yeah, right,
but
right.
it's not a hangar building. It's a building to hold GS
It's
ground
for
support
ground support
equipment.
equipment, right.
Right, it's not
Yeah,
a
that's what I
hangar.
meant. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mary.
It's not designed to have aircraft, it's
Right.
designed for,
It doesn't
Dave
have
and
to
his
be
team's
tall,
gear.
it's to hold ground, it's
don't have
a
any
different
aircraft.
entity, right. So it's not replacing hangar two, it's creating a building for GSE.
a
In
same
that
footprint,
same
essentially,
vicinity.
Right, I got you.
And that's what's called out in the strategic plan, and
Right.
we definitely endorse, right? So
Okay.
we put design money in for that for next year, right?
On your wish list, Mary.
Well, just also I wanted to say, doing anything to 220, conceivably it would be reimbursed by the FAA.
Maybe.
Well, the design, potentially, just to be aware that, you
The
know.
initial feedback we have from our consultants would be that the widening and extending would be outside, that design or development of the runway to that standard is outside the requirements of the FAA for the type of airport we are. So it probably could get funds, but is not likely to get any funds because of those reasons. We wouldn't compete against everybody
But you could
else.
ask.
We could ask, we could put it on the list.
Yeah.
Could we get some of this infrastructure airport bill money?
There are other ways we can apply to get money, no guarantees, but we definitely would look for other people's money first. But we can certainly budget money, so if we don't get other people's money, we can still move forward with these concepts.
But we still have to have the discussion if that's where we want to go. Yeah.
Yeah, so the
And I had
the
mentioned
approval would be money in the budget, and then we'd go through the process of bringing back quotes of here's what design, here's environmental cost, we're seeking your approval to move forward on this, and
And I-
knowing that we have the budget.
And I think it's all tied to when we get the response from the FAA.
Yes.
From their visit.
Right.
And then when we submit
From our
on the
submittal on
1634 or the
right.
220 and the whole enchilada. So it's sometime down
Yeah.
the line.
It would be definitely informed by those steps,
Right. Okay.
absolutely.
On land side, I had written forest management partnerships. I very much agree. Transportation, I see as another huge benefit. And what I thought was, the hospital wants to build 5 parking structures, and parking, we have so many employees coming in from Reno. And looking ahead to, could the airport, we have been the catalyst in the past, and we are the catalyst on many projects that have happened this area, interagency. And wondering about working together with town, Placer County, hospital, and other agencies to look to develop some sort of transportation service to Reno. I think there's worth exploring because our employees are coming from there and we don't have people here.
Yeah, it's a great concept. I think I have some comments in my management report for our next meeting around that, of shifting away from perhaps more traditional bus type situations that we've helped assist in the funding, to shifting that funding or other funding towards new innovative ways. You talk about rail to Reno or to the Bay Area, that would be long timelines to develop if possible, and something would directly benefit the community and the airport.
Right.
So those kind of concepts, I think.
So that-
I think it's a great idea.
Right,
So
and
that's
it
how I
might
would
be a couple $100,000 to help
Engage
you
in-
engage a
engage in
consultant,
efforts, right.
try and get these other entities at
Right.
the table, North Tahoe PUD, Tahoe City PUD, all of them, because employee staffing is a critical thing.
Yep.
And if they're not having to commute every day, we've reduced greenhouse gas. If they're able to get on some sort of an alternative transportation thing,
Right.
it means that we have to develop a transportation entity that is more than twice a day.
Right.
And so that, I would like to see some effort towards that. Because I agree, fire, the other thing I see is transportation. Our infrastructure is very limited here.
So that would be something I'd build in the budget as a line item for
Right.
coordination with other agencies around transportation, new innovative transportation solutions for the region.
Yeah. One idea would be a tiny home village. We're talking about giving money to Watt for the workforce housing, but as we're trying to decide what to do with our lands, is that something that we're interested in, is trying to develop something like that?
Right.
And,
It's
and
something
or,
we've been talking about with the
Yeah.
JPA, and I think to this point, their analysis is that the airport district's lands are not the best suited for the type of development that they would be interested in pursuing in the other partner agencies. So we've kind of put that as a low priority in the overall scheme of what's the best solution for housing.
Okay.
Right
When you
now.
say not the best suited, does that mean it's impossible? Because I'd say
I
you'd
would
have to
say
ask the workforce.
From the other partner public entities that are part of the JPA and the JPA itself, they have recommended that's not where, it's not impossible, but it's not where they would pursue first, second, or third. We're kind of in last place as far as prioritizing the land we have. It's the most incompatible to employee housing.
and I guess that's because probably the employees who would use tiny homes are not families with these type of jobs in the public agencies. Because
don't wanna
that's
just
how
be-
it's being
yeah.
set up, is only for employees of public agencies.
And the JPA is looking at housing for all employees in the North Lake Tahoe area, Truckee area.
Okay.
But also for public agencies. So they have a number of priority programs they're looking at. Use of our land is not currently on their agenda or table as a priority, right?
I'm trying, no, and on air side, these aren't necessarily money, let's see. Well, some of it is the greenhouse gas information. Trying to, we've got these nice new things here and in the lobby, trying to get something like this back out again for people to see about your greenhouse gas impact. And I think and it doesn't have to be this one. You could deal with the consultant to come up with something that you like better. But information for people to see what their impacts are, I think is valuable. And I'd like to see $50,000, $100,000 towards greenhouse gas education.
Yeah.
I-
I wouldn't put that in our capital budget we're talking about today, but that's something we can talk about in our communication and expenses.
Well, it would be part of the expense.
It's
It
part of
would-
our expense conversation next month.
Okay.
On that front, I think we're investing in N0 to quantify our own carbon footprint. That's going to be a public website that we'll share. Moving beyond that, once we establish our baselines and share out that.
We had that study, our greenhouse,
Talk about our principal number one way we're making a difference in this area is sustainable aviation fuel and communicating around that and what we're doing. In many ways, we're almost not giving our customers a choice about what the impact is. We are providing one solution to mitigate the impact. I know we've talked about this several times in many meetings. I won't speak for the board, but it's currently not on the strategic plan. It's a specific initiative.
well, it is, it's addressing it, and net zero for our impacts are insignificant compared to the aviation impacts. We had that study done by First Environment. And if you don't convey this information, then people don't really think about it. And it's kind of like, at some point, people stopped smoking as much because we did a big education outlet. When people didn't, I grew up when you didn't have to wear a seatbelt, but there was a big education component, and now everybody wears a seatbelt. So I see value in putting some money in education of our users of their greenhouse gas impact. And I have pushed it with you, but I'm just one voice.
I totally agree with you, but I don't know that that's the agenda.
But
Today is,
if, no,
today
but
is
it's
a
putting,
raspberry
it's
Pi,
putting
right?
money
So-
into a pot. Here, he's asking
No,
for
that's
ideas.
He's asking for ideas.
Capital.
We don't-
Capital.
we just list
These
the
are
ideas.
capital.
We're supposed to be in closed session right now, so.
Not till 3:30,
3:30.
Oh, is it? Oh, I thought it was 3.
yeah,
still, I think this is about capital,
capital.
not expense, right? Am I right?
Correct.
Today?
Yeah, you're right.
Okay,
So,
so these other ones I have are expense ideas.
and I
Okay.
totally agree with you, but not today.
So we'll have expense ideas at next month.
Welcome them ahead of time as well. You don't have to wait for the board meeting. Happy to meet with you and work through those.
I have a major capital suggestion for next year. I think this flag behind me is awfully faded, and I think we ought to get a new one.
That's an expense.
That's an expense. We'll talk about that next month.
We don't have to add to reserve.
Good observation. I can't disagree. Yeah.
All right, my turn?
Yes.
All right, I want to sort of generally just say I'm not in favor of getting into the business of anything but our airfield. That being said, I do think that we should allocate funds to specific things like transportation, like fire, like workforce housing, but I don't think we should start getting in the business of doling it out. Do you know what I mean? Do you understand? Okay, so we get $2 million and there's 4 fire districts and they each get 25% or whatever that is, the land mass that they're trying to manage. So I totally agree with David, 100%, $2 million off the top, as long as we can afford it, is something they can leverage into other things. The other thing, the only other thing really, which I guess would be landside, is I'd like to take our community partnerships to $1 million at a minimum every year and increase it by CPI at a minimum. And if we're making money hand over fist, give out more.
Okay, and that
That's
would
it for
be,
me.
that would be on the operating side too, but
It would?
definitely take your.
You would?
We can't even spend the 500 that we have.
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you.
Remember, we can. When we
So that is,
voted in
that
that
is on the
policy.
agenda for later.
Yeah,
We'll,
yes, we can, and we will.
Yeah.
Today,
But we would talk about that
in the next meeting.
at
Or
the operating
one
budget
after
meeting.
the next
Yes,
meeting.
yes. That's good feedback for that, right?
That's true.
Next month's meeting, yes,
Okay.
thanks, yeah.
Are you done?
Yeah, I mean,
Anything
we
else?
all have BHAGs, right? Big, hairy, audacious goals. I'd
Yeah.
love to have a rec
Yeah.
center at the lake, but that's not something I think we should save money for. It's a dream, it's cool, it'd be awesome. We'd put our name on it, we'd get lots of press, it'd be good for the whole community, but not something I think that we as the airport need to save money for.
Okay. And I think our
All right.
last,
Oh.
sorry?
Last but not least,
My
Your
chopped
idea,
liver?
sorry, Kat, yes, sorry.
Got my mic on and everything. I love, I love the fire. I love the looking at 220. Although, were we going to wait until we heard from back from the FAA about the 1634? I don't.
I think
What's
I
the
have to, I
timeline
have to look
on
at
that?
the, I don't know the timing right now, so I think I
Okay.
have to look at what those timelines look like.
Okay.
We could budget money for next year for a 220 concept.
Right.
When we'd actually employ it or execute it would be a matter of a couple of factors that are at play right now.
Okay.
So, with budgeting, we could budget, right?
And I would love to see a community hangar or some type of, it doesn't have to be a hangar, but some sort of community building where we can house the EAA, we can house the Civil Air Patrol, we can house Mission to Mars. Looking back on that hangar study, the community hangar study from 2017, I think, there are lots of different concepts in that study, and I think maybe it's probably expired at this point, but it would solve a lot of problems. We could tear down EAA building, we could widen that space in case we amend the 220. And, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on this airfield with the kids. And a lot of it is coming out of people's pocketbooks because we're not allowed to fund it, like the fuel for the Young Eagles. So I would really like to see us beef up that piece and put it in a place where parents didn't have to drive their kids, all the way down the runway to get there. So
Yeah.
that's my big idea.
Great.
anybody else?
Some good ideas. We're going to take those away. We're going to massage those into what those look like in budget, and then bring those back to you this next month as part of our operating budget also, to have further discussion about how these big ideas impact the operating budget.
Thank you for all your hard work, Kelly. You too, Rob.
Oh, Kelly.
Yes, please adjourn because this is a special meeting. Yep.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn this part of this meeting.
Second.
Director Diamond,
Yes.
Director Heatherington,
Yes.
Director Odette,
Yes.
Director Rolfe,
Yes.
Director Stevens.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned 3:08.